What's up, guys? So when I announced on Facebook that I was buying a Tokarev, I was a little surprised by the hatred that some of my viewers have for the Tokarev. And these same guys really like the 1911, which kind of seems crazy to me because these two handguns are very similar.
Move it up slow.
Alright, as you can see, I have both these guns completely taken apart. On the left is the 1911 and on the right is the Tokarev. And already you can see a similarity. Alright, let's take it apart. So on the 1911, very first thing you do is you push this plunger in and turn the bushing. And this is the most precarious part of this design. You know what? I find it a lot easier if I do it like this, but you don't get to see it as well. But you use a magazine like that, and then you let that up slowly. So there is your plunger. Then you pull the slide back to this notch back here, like that. And your slide release comes right out. And there you go. And to finish it off, you can pull the recoil spring out, turn the bushing to the other direction. It comes right out. And you push the barrel link down. You can pull the barrel right out of the gun. And that's a basic field strip. Alright, so once you get this little clasp to move over, there's nothing holding that slide release in place. On the 1911, you have to pull the slide back to a specific spot. On the Tokarev, you can just pull it right out. And that's why I prefer to do it this way versus dealing with the spring on the front. So it comes right off the frame, and then it's gonna do that, and you can pull the recoil spring out. Then, unlike the 1911 that you just have to move the bushing a little bit, you have to go all the way up before the bushing comes out. But just like a 1911, you have to push down the barrel link. Push it out. So to take the 1911 slide apart, it's very easy. You have to push the firing pin, that's it, sticking out, and you have to push down on the firing pin stop. So Tokarev is not quite as easy, and this is actually my very first time doing this. Okay, now the pin's out. It's being held in by the punch, so when I pull it out, it's going to come out. And there is your firing pin, spring. Now, to take the extractor out, there's a pin right there that you tap out. You have to knock out the pin, take out the extractor, and then watch out for this little bitty spring. Like, I do mean itty bitty. Now this, in my opinion, is one of the advantages this gun has over the 1911. To take the hammer out, you just, once the slide's off, you just pry it right off. And there you go. You have the hammer spring in there, you have the sear, the disconnector, the whole trigger pack. So let's say you have something break, an armorer could take it out, put in one that's pre-built, and then work on this one later or scrap it or whatever. On a 1911, there's a lot more to it to get the hammer out of the frame. Alright, so the first thing I gotta do is knock out that pin. This pin holds the mainspring housing in place. Push down a little bit. There we go. And here comes out mainspring housing. Okay, so I decided to take apart the mainspring housing. If you're ever going to do this, watch out for that spring. It's a very strong spring. Alright, so now that the pin's out, there is your mainspring. Alright, so next step, you got to take out this safety. Now you got to watch out, this spring-loaded plunger will go flying if you don't watch it. And on my other 1911s, it's got more of a safety, so it's a little bit hard for me to grab onto. But if I take these pliers with little plastic tips on them, and I go like this, see how that thing tried to fly out? There's the plunger. This little plunger. This goes into the safety. This one goes into the slide release. So that's what gives it tension. So now with that out, you can pull the safety out. There's your safety. And with the safety out, you can pull out beaver's tail. Alright, so now I can pull out this spring. You can see how it looks. This is gives your grip safety its pressure as well as your trigger and your sear. So to take the hammer out, you just push this pin out. There's your pin. And there's your hammer and strut. And then one more pin. Push that out. And there is your sear and disconnector. Alright, so your next step is to take out the trigger. The trigger is held in by the mag release. So you push down here and then you can turn that spring and then the mag release will come right out. And then the trigger. Alright, to get the mag release out, you got to push this pin in, which looks like a screw, but it's actually not. And you push it all the way through to the other side. And then I push the other side out. Maybe. There it goes. There we go. You can see why I thought it was a screw at first. Because it kind of looks like a screw when it's together, but there is the mag release. It's similar to a 1911, but it is different. To get this out, the safety out, you have to line it up and pull it out like this. I've already done this once off camera. You got to make sure that you don't lose this little plunger and spring that go right in here. The safety off, you can pull the trigger out like that. There's your trigger. And then out comes your spring. Somehow. There it goes. Pull up and out. And there we go. Gun is completely to the bare frame. Alright, so I did this off camera. You take this pin out. This hammer comes out. And then if you hit this pin right here, your sear and disconnector come right out. If you look at the slides, yeah, the Tokarev is a little bit smaller, but different caliber. And this one's blued, whereas this one's parkerized. But you can tell they're very similar. I mean, the sights, the front sights look very, very similar. The rear sight looks different, though. On the Tokarev, it is a really high sight, but they are very similar. Now, the extractor on the Tokarev is different. It's more like a SIG 1911 since it's external. On the 1911, it is all internal. Now, let's look at the barrels. I mean, come on. You have to see that these are very similar. The locking lugs are very, very similar. Now, on the Tokarev, to save cost, they wrap all the way around. On the 1911, they're just on top. But same concept. The barrel links are both the same. Now, the feed ramp is very similar. Now, I will say the 1911 has a barrel hood right here, and the Tokarev does not. But you can see these barrels look so similar. And speaking of the barrels, let's look at the slide stops. So, as you can tell, they're very, very similar. I will say the 1911 has more meat on it, but I have an easier time hitting the Tokarev one. The grip is smaller, and I can reach the slide release a lot easier on the Tokarev than the 1911. I have to shift with the 1911. I kind of wish on the Tokarev it would come back just a little bit further and have a little bit more meat on it, but I kind of prefer the Tokarev, if I have to be perfectly honest, on the slide release. The bushings are also very similar. On the 1911, it doesn't wrap around the barrel nut like the Tokarev does, and it's a little bit shorter on the Tokarev, as you can see. Also, when you're taking the Tokarev apart, as you saw from the disassembly, this moves a lot further up than the way this bushing comes out. So the lugs are a little bit different on these two, but they definitely resemble each other. And the plunger on the 1911 is definitely a lot different than the plunger on the Tokarev. It's just this little nub. And the guide rods are also very similar. A little bit different, but you can definitely see the similarity between these. The safeties on this gun are quite a bit different. I hate the Tokarev. All this does is block the trigger, whereas the 1911, it actually blocks the hammer. I don't know, I prefer this kind of safety over this. All this thing protects you against is Barney fifing it, where you have a negligent discharge because you pulled the trigger. Now, the big advantage of the Tokarev, in my opinion, over the 1911 is the removable pack. So the hammer pack has the sear, the disconnector, the hammer spring, all contained into one pack. Whereas the 1911, to take it apart, is pretty involved. So this is an advantage. If you had something break or you needed a new spring, you wouldn't have to replace everything like the 1911. You would just take this hammer pack out and put a new one, and then an armorer back at the base could fix this. Whereas this, you pretty much have to send the whole gun back to an armorer to get it fixed. Somebody in the field could fix this quick. The hammers are quite a bit different, as you can see. So the hammer on the 1911 has this long strut that goes into the mainspring housing that's right here. And that right here is the mainspring right here. So this engages into that. On the Tokarev, that's the spring. So it's just a lot less parts, and seems to work just fine. They're very similar in how they engage in the sear. Right there, you can see it's very similar. Though I will say the cuts on the Tokarev hammer are a lot better to engage in than this particular 1911. They have better ones. Also, my 1911 bites me. The Tokarev doesn't. The disconnectors resemble each other, honestly. I mean, they're different. You couldn't. They're not compatible with each other, but you can see a similarity between these two. Same thing with the sear. You can see there is a definite similarity between these two parts. Except the sear on this has its own spring, whereas on this it needs this spring, which is for the grip safety, the sear, and the trigger. It's all one spring. On the Tokarev, it's one spring for the trigger. So I guess that's similar concept, but this only is for the trigger spring. This is for 3 different things. So I guess the Tokarev is a little bit simpler. The 1911 has this grip safety, and the Tokarev has nothing. I have nothing to compare it to. Let's see here. What else am I missing? The mag release on the 1911 is these 3 parts. So you see on this plunger right here, there's a screw, and you push this in and churn it, and it locks into this little groove, and that's how you're able to take it out. On the Tokarev, this thing actually kind of confused me. So you can see it right there. When it's closed up, it looked like a flathead screw, and when I first tried messing with it, I was churning it. I'm like, what? It's not doing anything. It's because it's just a spring that's split in half. And when it's together, it really looks like a flathead screwdriver would take it out. So that was a little learning thing for me, is you got to tap that out. Felt kind of weird tapping what I looked like a screw. Now, come on. Look at that. Look at that similarity. There's a lot more meat on the Tokarev trigger, but they are very similar. What am I missing? I hate the safety. Let's look at the firing pin. I guess I haven't shown that yet. So here's the firing pins. Again, look very similar. Now, to take the firing pin out of the Tokarev, you have to knock out a pin, whereas on the 1911, you push this in and pull off the firing pin stop. Which, in my opinion, that's easier to take apart than this. You have to take out a punch to get this out, and then you got to watch that this doesn't go flying. I don't know. I prefer the 1911 when it comes to disassembly on that part. So let's look at the bare frame. So since this has a removable trigger pack, you can see that the ejector is part of this part. So that's a difference. It doesn't have that plunger tube on the Tokarev. Also, the 1911 doesn't have that stupid little safety that looks horrible. I'm a little mad about that. The grip angles are quite a bit different, if you can tell. And I really don't like it on the Tokarev. It doesn't point natural. It's just awkward to me. The 1911 feels fantastic in my hands. That's my big gripe about the Tokarev, other than that safety is awful, is the grip angle feels awkward and it doesn't point naturally. The 1911 points phenomenally. Now, on the 1911, you can tell there's these bushings for the grips. On the Tokarev, it's held in a little bit differently. So you can see when you want to keep it in, you churn it and this locks into the frame, and that's what holds it in place, which I think is kind of creative. On the 1911, there's screws that go into the bushings. The magazines look very, very similar, other than this one's a little larger but thinner, so it's wider but thinner. Also, the catch is a little bit different on the Tokarev versus the 1911. But the holes is a very similar design. The Extractor. The Extractor is quite a bit different on the 1911. It's a long extractor that engages. And when you take out the firing pin stop, you can take out the extractor. On this, you have to knock out the pin, take out the extractor, and then watch out for this little bitty spring. Like, I do mean itty bitty. So it's something you gotta watch out for. I prefer the 1911s, to be honest with you. Some people say the external extractor is more reliable. I don't know, but I don't know. This is so much easier to replace. I mean, I guess both of them are pretty easy, but on my Tokarev, man, that pin did not want to come out. So maybe I'm just jaded. So as you can see, there are a lot of similarities between these two handguns. I mean, you can definitely tell that the Russians took some influences from John Moses Browning's design, with a couple upgrades in my opinion. But I don't understand why you would hate this gun and love the 1911. I mean, the Tokarev has been extremely reliable, pretty accurate. It's got a good trigger on it. I mean, honestly, it's not a bad gun, and for what they're selling for right now, it's a steal. They're fantastic guns. Honestly, do I think it's better than the 1911? No. Do I think it's worse? No. Honestly, it's just a decent gun. I don't understand why you would hate this gun. I can understand you hating aspects of this gun, but I can't understand you hating it. I actually went into depth asking the guys, why do you hate this gun? And they just kept going back to, oh, it's Russian crap, it's cheaply made, and I'm not seeing any evidence of that. I kind of wonder if it stems back to we hate, the Soviet Union kind of thing. I don't know. That's the only thing I could think of, because I really think both these guns are good designs. And I don't know. Whatever. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Stay tuned. I got a lot of cool stuff coming up in the future. I'm going to be working with Prasky Gunworks pretty soon, and I'm going to be getting some really cool guns on the channel. So look out for that soon.